There is something living inside you right now that is stealing iron directly out of your blood, dumping its toxic waste into your intestine around the clock, wrecking your skin from the inside out, and grinding your nervous system down so slowly that you attribute every symptom to stress, bad sleep, or getting older. And the medical system, the same system that charges you for every appointment, every prescription, every follow-up, has almost no financial incentive to stop and explain this to you. According to the World Health Organization, approximately 1.5 billion people are currently infected with soil-transmitted helminths. That is the clinical term for worms that enter the body through contaminated soil, food, or surfaces. Globally, the total burden of intestinal parasitic infections exceeds 3.5 billion people, with hundreds of thousands of deaths recorded annually. Those are not numbers from a naturopath's website. Those are the WHO's own figures. And I want you to sit with what they actually mean. More than 1 in 5 people on this planet is hosting an intestinal parasite that is actively damaging their health right now. If you think modern hygiene has made this a non-issue in wealthy countries, I want to dismantle that assumption completely, because it is the first and most dangerous myth that keeps people sick. Subscribe to Dr. Waterling right now and hit like on this video. The healthcare system does not get paid to keep you healthy. It gets paid when you're sick, confused, and dependent. This channel is built on exactly the opposite principle. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Subscribe and like, and let's make sure this information reaches the people who need it. I'm Sam Waterling, and I've spent 15 years in clinical practice, watching patients go from doctor to doctor with fatigue, unexplained skin conditions, chronic digestive complaints, and mood instability, and getting prescribed symptom management for every single one of those problems without anyone asking a more fundamental question. What is actually disrupting the environment inside this person's body? Parasitic infections are one of the most underdiagnosed contributors to chronic illness in everyday adult patients. And the reason they stay underdiagnosed is partly biological. Parasites are extraordinarily good at hiding, and partly systemic. A 15-minute appointment does not leave much room for a thorough parasitology discussion. So let me give you now what 15 years of clinical practice tells me you need to hear. Let's begin by completely dismantling the myth of modern sterility. You may wash your hands 20, 30 times a day. You may soak every bunch of herbs and every vegetable in clean water before it touches your cutting board. You may spray every kitchen surface with high concentration antibacterial cleaner. These are all genuinely good habits, and I want to be clear, hygiene matters enormously, and you should continue doing all of it. But here's the biological reality that no amount of hand washing fully addresses. Parasite eggs are among the most environmentally durable objects in nature. Their outer shells, called egg capsules or cysts, depending on the species, are chemically resistant to most disinfectants at household concentrations. They survive for weeks and months on everyday surfaces. Handrails on public transit, soil tracked in on shoes, the fur of domestic animals that go outdoors, and yes, the surface of paper money, which changes hands thousands of times. They are not a rural problem or a developing country problem. They exist in the environment of every city, every neighborhood, and every household. The American Academy of Family Physicians documents meaningful prevalence of pinworm, giardia, hookworm, and intestinal amoeba infections across the United States. These are not exotic tropical diseases. They are here, in your environment, continuously. The key insight I want you to internalize is this. The right question is no longer whether parasite eggs enter your body. They do, periodically, for virtually everyone. The right question is what happens after they arrive, and that is entirely determined by the state of your internal defenses. A healthy, well-functioning digestive system destroys the vast majority of incoming parasite eggs before they can establish a foothold. High gastric acid, the concentrated hydrochloric acid in your stomach, burns through the outer layers of many eggs and larvae before they can progress. Concentrated, free-flowing bile from a healthy gallbladder acts as a powerful natural antiseptic throughout the intestine. Active intestinal motility, the rhythmic muscular contractions that push contents through and out, physically expels organisms before they can anchor. A well-populated gut microbiome, meaning the trillions of beneficial bacteria that live in your colon, competes aggressively for space and resources that parasites need. When all of those systems are operating well, most parasitic exposures resolve without ever producing symptoms. The problem is that for many adults, one or more of those defense layers has been compromised by diet, stress, antibiotic use, age, or the accumulated damage from prior infections. And that is when the balance shifts. Now, I want you to understand what the intestine actually looks like, because this shapes everything about why parasitic infections are so persistent and so difficult to fully clear. Your small intestine alone is approximately 6 meters long, about 20 feet. Your entire gastrointestinal tract from mouth to rectum is several meters more. This tube is not smooth. It is deeply folded into circular folds called plicae circulares, and the surface of those folds is covered in millions of tiny finger-like projections called villi. Each one a microscopic absorptive structure designed to maximize surface contact with digested food. The total absorptive surface area of the small intestine, when you account for all these folds and villi, is roughly 250 square meters, the size of a tennis court folded into your abdomen. Within the recesses of those folds, in the mucus layers that coat the intestinal wall, and in the anatomical pockets formed at the junctions of different bowel segments, parasites find shelter. They anchor, they hide from immune cells, they persist. You cannot sterilize that surface. You cannot flush it clean with a single treatment. Any approach that does not account for the biological complexity of that terrain is going to underperform, and I will explain exactly what that means for treatment strategy in a moment. First, let's go through the clinical symptoms in real depth, because recognizing this pattern in yourself or your children is the first step to doing anything about it. The first and most frequently encountered symptom in my clinical practice is abdominal pain without a clear cause. Not pain that follows a heavy or greasy meal. Not pain associated with a stomach bug. Pain that appears spontaneously, in waves, often described as cramping, twisting, or drilling sensations, localized most commonly around the navel, though it can migrate. It appears suddenly, grips the gut hard for minutes, and then disappears without any intervention, without antispasmodic medication, without doing anything at all. Parents often notice this pattern in children and describe it as the child doubling over briefly and then resuming normal activity as if nothing happened. The mechanism has two components. Large parasites physically traumatize the delicate mucosal lining of the intestinal wall as they move or feed, causing local tissue damage and triggering a pain reflex. Simultaneously, parasites secrete compounds that directly stimulate smooth muscle contraction in the intestinal wall, producing sharp reflex spasm. When both parents bring in a child who gets unexplained abdominal pain regularly and there is no dietary pattern, no infectious cause, no anatomical finding, parasitic infestation belongs at the top of the differential diagnosis. That is 15 years of clinical pattern recognition talking. The second symptom is one that patients almost never volunteer. I have to ask about it specifically because adults are embarrassed to mention it, and parents sometimes do not connect it to anything medical. It is intense itching in the perianal region, around the anus, predominantly at night. The biology here is one of the more remarkable examples of parasitic adaptation in all of medicine, and once you understand it, you will never look at this symptom the same way again. Pinworms, Anaerobius vermicularis, are the most prevalent intestinal parasite in high-income countries, with estimates of 2 to 20% prevalence in school-age children alone. Adult pinworms live in the cecum and colon, the lower portions of the large intestine. The females, after mating, do not deposit their eggs inside the intestine. Instead, they migrate down to the anal canal and emerge through the anus, specifically at night when you are deeply asleep and your anal sphincter muscle, the ring of muscle that closes the rectum, is fully relaxed. The female deposits thousands of eggs on the perianal skin, fixing them in place with a thick, sticky, adhesive matrix she secretes specifically for this purpose. It is that foreign adhesive combined with the mechanical movement of the worm itself on sensitive perianal skin that triggers intense nerve irritation and the itching reflex. The infected person begins scratching in their sleep, completely unconsciously, completely reflexively. Children do this without any inhibition. In that moment of scratching, thousands of microscopic eggs transfer directly under the fingernails, where they can survive for up to 3 weeks at normal room temperature. The next morning, the person wakes up, does not wash their hands thoroughly enough, or touches their face, bites a fingernail, handles food, and the eggs complete the journey back into the mouth. Larvae hatch in the small intestine, mature in the colon within 2 to 6 weeks, and the entire cycle repeats. This process, reinfecting the same host from themselves, is called autoinfection, and it is the reason pinworm infestations can persist indefinitely in a single individual without any new external exposure. There is also a second reinfection route called retroinfection. Larvae that have just hatched from eggs on the perianal skin can re-enter the anus and migrate upward into the colon, restarting the cycle without ever passing through the mouth. When I see nighttime anal itching in a child, the clinical response is immediate and mechanical. Tight-fitting underwear worn at night to physically block access to the perianal skin. Nails cut as short as possible, eliminating the subungual reservoir where eggs accumulate. Thorough hand washing with soap immediately upon waking before touching anything. These are not optional comfort measures. They are evidence-based interruptions of the transmission cycle, and they are as important as any pharmacological treatment. The third major clinical marker is persistent, therapy-resistant skin pathology. This is the symptom that sends patients to dermatologists for years, generates prescription after prescription for topical steroids and antihistamines, and never fully resolves, because the root cause is not being addressed. Here is the biochemistry. The small intestine, as I mentioned, is extraordinarily absorptive. Everything that is present inside that intestinal lumen, the hollow space inside the gut, can and does get absorbed into the bloodstream through the intestinal wall. When a parasite is living in that space, it is continuously releasing metabolic waste products, its own excretions, its shed outer layers, compounds produced by its digestion of your nutrients. These are biologically foreign molecules, and your immune system recognizes them as foreign. They enter the bloodstream, circulate to the liver, which is your primary detoxification organ, processing everything that comes from the gut before it reaches the rest of the body, and the liver begins working under a chronic toxic load that it was not designed to sustain indefinitely. When that load exceeds the liver's processing capacity, the body activates secondary elimination pathways. The skin is the body's largest organ, roughly 2 square meters of surface area, and it functions as a secondary elimination route under conditions of metabolic stress. Toxins that the liver cannot fully process get rerouted toward the skin and excreted through sweat glands and sebaceous glands. The result is inflammation, rash, abnormal dryness, flaking, and persistent itching that does not respond to topical treatments, because you are treating the exhaust, not the engine. I want to state this as clearly as I can because I have seen it play out in patient after patient. Chronic skin conditions, neuropathic itch, dry eczema, atopic dermatitis, and psoriatic presentations almost always have a significant internal gut component. The gut and the skin are connected through what immunologists now call the gut-skin axis. Any clinician who is prescribing only topical steroids for a chronic skin condition without investigating the intestinal environment is providing incomplete care. When the underlying intestinal load is addressed, the skin frequently clears in ways that years of dermatological treatment never achieved. The fourth symptom is functional digestive disruption. Bloating, heaviness after meals, intestinal gurgling, alternating constipation and loose stools, and a general sense that your gut simply does not work reliably. You eat clean food, well prepared, good quality, and still feel uncomfortable afterward. There is no obvious food intolerance. There is no structural pathology. What is happening is that the microbial environment of the intestine has been disrupted. Your gut microbiome, the community variety of beneficial bacteria that regulate enzyme secretion, motility, and fermentation of fiber has been destabilized by the presence of parasites and by the inflammatory compounds they release. Digestive enzymes are being secreted under abnormal conditions. The physical presence of worms in the intestinal lumen mechanically interferes with normal peristalsis, the wave-like muscular contractions that move food through. Your digestion is no longer running on your biology alone. Part of it has been hijacked. The fifth symptom is chronic fatigue, exhaustion that does not improve with sleep, that is present every morning before the day has even started, that makes basic cognitive and physical tasks feel disproportionately effortful. Patients describe it as feeling like the battery never fully charges. The mechanism is dual and compounding. On one side, nutrient theft. The small intestine is where amino acids from protein, fatty acids from fat, glucose from carbohydrates, and micronutrients including iron, zinc, B vitamins, and fat-soluble vitamins are absorbed. Parasites sit precisely in this high absorption zone and intercept those nutrients before your cells can use them. You are eating and digesting food, but a portion of what you absorb is going to fuel organisms that are working against you. On the other side, systemic toxin load. The metabolic waste products of intestinal parasites circulate in your bloodstream continuously. Your immune system mounts a low-grade inflammatory response to those foreign compounds. Inflammation is energetically expensive. It consumes cellular resources that would otherwise go toward normal tissue maintenance and repair. The combined result is a state of chronic metabolic debt. You are spending more than you are taking in at the cellular level every single day. That is what fatigue without a clear cause often is. The sixth clinical domain is neurological and behavioral, and this is where the conversation most urgently needs to happen for parents. Parasites release compounds during their normal metabolism that include substances toxic to nervous tissue. These neurotoxins, chemicals that impair or damage nerve cell function, are absorbed into the bloodstream, cross the blood-brain barrier, the selective membrane that separates the brain's circulation from the rest of the body, and directly affect brain chemistry. The observable results in children include extreme irritability, emotional dysregulation, aggression without clear provocation, inconsolable crying, irrational fears, and night terrors. Vivid, terrifying nightmares that wake children screaming. Children experiencing significant parasitic toxin load often exhibit what parents describe as a personality that is changed, more reactive, less resilient, harder to comfort. One of the most diagnostically significant nocturnal symptoms in this context is bruxism, grinding the teeth during sleep. The masseter muscles, the large jaw-closing muscles, enter involuntary, sustained, high-force contraction during sleep. The sound is audible. The force is sufficient to wear down tooth enamel over time. The current evidence-based interpretation is that systemic neurotoxin load drives excessive motor neuron activity during the reduced inhibitory control of sleep. When a parent mentions that their child grinds their teeth at night, my first question is not about dental alignment. My first question is about the full clinical picture: abdominal pain, perianal itching, skin changes, mood instability, and fatigue. Bruxism does not exist in isolation. It is part of a syndrome. The seventh and potentially most medically serious consequence of chronic parasitic infection is nutritional deficiency at the systemic level. And the most dangerous of these is iron deficiency anemia. Anemia means the blood cannot carry adequate oxygen. Hemoglobin, the oxygen-carrying protein inside red blood cells, is present in insufficient quantity. The result is pallor, weakness, breathlessness on minor exertion, poor concentration, and in children, impaired cognitive development. The parasitic mechanism for causing this is direct and brutal. Hookworms, Ancylostoma duodenale and Necator americanus, are hematophages. They feed on blood. They attach to the mucosa of the small intestine using specialized mouthparts and create a wound through which blood flows from intestinal capillaries into the worm's digestive tract. Blood loss occurs through two mechanisms simultaneously: direct consumption by the parasite and leakage of blood at the attachment site from the wound itself. In heavily infected individuals, blood loss from hookworm feeding can reach up to 9 milliliters per day. That is a small volume by transfusion standards, but accumulated over weeks and months, it creates a profound iron deficit that oral iron supplements alone cannot correct because the source of loss is still active. The clinical picture is recognizable and heartbreaking when you see it in a child. Gray, dull skin with an earthy, pallid tone, cracking and fissuring at the corners of the mouth, a sign called angular cheilitis that reflects B vitamin and iron depletion. Sunken eyes, hair that breaks easily. Every one of those signs is your body communicating that its reserves have been depleted and that something is taking far more than is being replaced. If you or your child has been diagnosed with iron deficiency anemia that does not respond well to oral iron supplementation, parasitic infection must be on the differential diagnosis. Treating the deficiency without eliminating its cause is managing the meter while the tap runs. Here is something critical I need you to understand. The absence of these symptoms does not guarantee you are free of parasitic infection. Many intestinal parasites are entirely asymptomatic for extended periods of their life cycle. They are biologically optimized for covert, long-term residency that does not kill or incapacitate the host, because a living host is more useful to them than a dead one. Symptomatic infection is the visible portion of a much larger iceberg. But if even one of the patterns I have just described resonates with your experience, the unexplained abdominal cramps, the nighttime itching, the resistant skin condition, the fatigue that won't shift, the child who grinds their teeth, the probability of a significant parasitic component to what you are experiencing is clinically meaningful, and it deserves a systematic response. Now I want to talk about the biggest mistake that people make when they finally decide to do something about this. And the majority of people, I would say the vast majority in my clinical observation, make this exact mistake. They go to a pharmacy, they buy a broad spectrum antiparasitic drug, something like albendazole or mebendazole, they take a single dose and they believe the problem is solved. Let me explain in precise physiological terms why this reasoning is flawed at multiple levels and why it can actually make you feel dramatically worse. First problem, the life cycle coverage problem. Antiparasitic drugs work by disrupting the biochemistry of the adult, actively metabolizing worm. Albendazole, for example, blocks the formation of tubulin, a structural protein the worm needs to maintain its cellular skeleton and absorb glucose. Without tubulin polymerization, the worm cannot function, it is paralyzed, and it dies. But eggs and encysted larvae, the immature dormant stages of the parasite life cycle, do not have the same metabolic activity. Their outer shells provide significant chemical protection. A single dose of a standard antiparasitic drug does not reliably eliminate eggs or early larval stages. Those protected forms survive the treatment. They mature into adult worms over the following 2 to 6 weeks. And by the time they are mature and you are feeling symptomatic again, you assume you have been reinfected, when in reality you were never fully cleared. Effective treatment must span multiple generations, long enough to cover the full egg to adult maturation window, or the first cohort to escape treatment simply rebuilds the population. Second problem, the elimination problem. This is the one that nobody in a pharmacy or an advertisement will tell you about. And it is the one that can make you genuinely ill. When an antiparasitic drug kills a large worm, that worm does not teleport out of your body. It is a mass of biological tissue sitting inside a warm, moist tube at 37 degrees Celsius, body temperature. If your intestinal motility is good, if your bowel moves reliably and actively, the dead organism passes through and exits within hours. But if your bowel motility is reduced, if you tend toward constipation, if your peristalsis is sluggish, which is extremely common in people with significant parasitic load, that dead worm stays. It sits in your intestine for 2, 3, sometimes more days. At body temperature, protein-rich biological tissue begins to break down within hours. The breakdown products, putrefactive amines, endotoxins, and the parasite's own stored metabolic compounds, are absorbed through the highly permeable intestinal wall directly into your bloodstream. Your liver, which is already working hard to manage the chronic toxin load from the living parasite, now receives a concentrated bolus of decomposition products on top of its existing burden. The clinical result is a toxic reaction: high fever, nausea, vomiting, severe weakness, headache, and a profound sense of systemic illness that patients consistently describe as worse than anything they felt before treatment. This is not a rare edge case. This is a predictable physiological consequence of treating parasitic infection without first ensuring that the elimination route is open and functional. This is why the medical algorithm matters, and I want you to memorize this sequence because it is the difference between a treatment that works and one that makes you sicker. Phase 1 is preparation, and it is non-negotiable. Before you introduce any anti-parasitic agent, pharmaceutical or botanical, you must establish reliable bowel function. That means a daily, comfortable, complete bowel movement. It means normalized bile flow, because bile, produced by the liver and stored in the gallbladder, is your body's most potent endogenous intestinal antiseptic. Fresh, well-concentrated bile physically disrupts the lipid membrane, the fatty outer coating of parasite eggs and organisms. It stimulates intestinal motility. It activates pancreatic enzymes. It creates a hostile chemical environment for parasitic organisms throughout the small intestine. Sluggish bile, which accumulates when the gallbladder is not stimulated properly by dietary fat and bitter compounds, means reduced chemical defense and reduced motility. Spend at minimum 2 to 3 weeks before any anti-parasitic protocol normalizing these parameters. This preparation phase is the foundation. Skipping it is the reason so many people have terrible experiences with anti-parasitic treatment. Phase 2 is the treatment course itself. And here is where I am going to make a recommendation that may surprise some of you because it departs from the standard pharmaceutical approach. I prefer botanical preparations, plant-derived compounds with documented anti-parasitic activity, over synthetic anti-parasitic drugs as the primary treatment vehicle for most adult patients. And my reasoning is clinical and biochemical. Synthetic anti-parasitic drugs are hepatotoxic. They cause measurable liver cell damage at therapeutic doses. The liver of a patient with chronic parasitic infection is already metabolically stressed. Adding a hepatotoxic agent to a stressed liver is a compounding insult that can produce clinically significant liver enzyme elevation and, in susceptible patients, more serious damage. Botanical preparations, particularly plant bitters, work through a fundamentally different and physiologically more compatible mechanism. They stimulate the body's own defenses. They do not simply poison the parasite. They enhance the host's natural anti-parasitic systems simultaneously. Let me explain how plant bitters work because the mechanism is genuinely impressive. Bitter compounds, the class of phytochemicals responsible for the bitter taste in medicinal plants, interact with taste receptors distributed throughout the gastrointestinal tract, not just the tongue. When these receptors are activated, they trigger a coordinated secretory response. Gastric acid production increases, elevating the chemical hostility of the stomach environment to incoming eggs and larvae. Bile secretion from the gallbladder increases dramatically. Concentrated bile flows into the small intestine, where its detergent-like activity disrupts parasite membranes. Pancreatic enzyme secretion increases. Proteases and lipases that digest protein and fat begin attacking the outer coats of parasitic organisms. Intestinal motility accelerates, physically moving organisms through and out. And beyond all of this, many bitter plant compounds have direct pharmacological activity against parasites. They are not simply stimulating the host's defenses, they are also directly toxic to the parasites themselves. The botanical preparation I place at the top of my clinical toolkit for anti-parasitic treatment is concentrated aspen bark extract, derived from Populus tremula, the European aspen. Aspen bark contains salicin and its derivatives. These are phenolic glycosides, naturally occurring plant compounds with well-documented biological activity, along with flavonoids and proanthocyanidins. Experimentally, concentrated aspen bark extract has demonstrated direct anti-parasitic activity, producing 100% mortality in parasitic organisms at a concentration of 10⁻³ within 72 hours in controlled in vitro studies. In animal experiments, efficiency against Opisthochus, a liver fluke, meaning a flat parasitic worm that infects the bile ducts, reached over 83%. This is not an anecdotal folk remedy. This is a plant compound with published experimental pharmacology. Beyond its direct antiparasitic effects, aspen bark extract is a powerful cholagogue, meaning it strongly promotes bile secretion, and it has hepatoprotective properties. It supports liver cell function and reduces hepatic inflammation, rather than stressing the liver further. The documented clinical range of aspen bark extract is broad enough that it has been investigated as a component of treatment protocols for pulmonary tuberculosis, one of the most difficult bacterial infections in medicine. If you have used aspen bark extract as part of a parasite protocol, I want to hear about your experience in the comments. Genuinely, write what you noticed and when. Supporting botanical agents worth incorporating alongside aspen bark extract include bitter wormwood, Artemisia absinthium, which contains absinthin and other sesquiterpene lactones with documented antiparasitic and antimicrobial properties. Sandy everlasting, Helichrysum arenarium, supports bile production and liver function, reinforcing the cholagogue effect. Calamus root, Acorus calamus, has traditional and experimental support for its effects on intestinal motility and digestive secretion, which enhances the clearance of dying organisms. Practical dosing for concentrated aspen bark extract. Begin conservatively, approximately half a teaspoon, dissolved thoroughly in half a glass of warm water, taken 15 to 20 minutes before breakfast on a completely empty stomach. The empty stomach timing is deliberate and important. You want the concentrated botanical preparation to traverse the full length of the small intestine, where the majority of parasitic organisms are located, at maximum concentration, before food dilutes it and before digestive secretions are already fully activated by the presence of a meal. For dry botanical preparations, wormwood herb, everlasting, calamus root, prepare them as an infusion according to the package instructions. Typically, a measured quantity steeped in boiling water for 15 to 20 minutes. Divide the resulting infusion into portions and drink throughout the day. Always 15 to 20 minutes before meals, never after. The goal each time is to stimulate bile and gastric secretion before the meal arrives so that the antiparasitic chemical environment is active when fresh food and any new eggs it carries enters the digestive tract. A full therapeutic course of aspen bark extract should run 3 to 4 weeks. This duration is not arbitrary. It spans the complete egg to adult maturation cycle of most common intestinal parasites, which means no cohort, not the adults, not the larvae, not the hatching eggs, survives the treatment window without encountering the antiparasitic environment at some vulnerable stage of development. There is a safety principle for botanical treatment that I need you to take seriously. These are not neutral compounds. They are physiologically active, they stimulate the liver and the nervous system, and they must be taken with attention. If you develop significant nausea during the course, do not force through it. Do not take a full dose and grit your teeth. Forced dosing against strong nausea is counterproductive. The nervous system develops a conditioned aversion response, a kind of pharmacological refusal, and the treatment becomes practically unsustainable. Reduce the dose, allow your body to adapt over several days, and increase gradually. The goal is sustained administration over weeks, not a heroic one-time dose. One additional botanical worth dedicated discussion is dried clove, Syzygium aromaticum, the same spice you know from cooking. Clove buds contain eugenol and other phenolic compounds with documented antimicrobial and antiparasitic properties. The preparation is simple and the cost is negligible. For an adult, take 10 to 12 whole, oil-rich dried clove buds. For a child, 5 to 6 buds scaled to body weight and age. Place them in a clean glass in the evening and pour half a glass of boiling water over them. Leave the glass covered overnight. The full overnight steep extracts the maximum concentration of volatile oils and phenolic compounds into the liquid. In the morning, add warm water to fill the glass. Drink several large sips before breakfast. Then continue adding warm water and sipping throughout the day until the entire volume is consumed by evening. This preparation can be used twice per week for 1 full month as part of the broader botanical protocol. It does not replace the aspen bark extract, it complements it, providing additional antiparasitic coverage through a different chemical mechanism. Now there is one rule that applies from the first day of treatment to the last, and it is as important as the botanical protocol itself. Aggressive, consistent hydration throughout the entire course. Here is why this is not optional. When parasites begin dying in significant numbers, which is what you want and what will happen if the protocol is working, their decomposition products are absorbed into your bloodstream and must be filtered and excreted by your kidneys. The kidneys are your primary filtration organs, and their efficiency is directly dependent on blood volume, which is directly dependent on how much water you are drinking. Adequate hydration increases renal blood flow, increases urine output, and accelerates the clearance of circulating endotoxins from your system. Insufficient hydration during a parasite die-off results in elevated circulating toxin concentrations, which manifests as headache, fatigue, nausea, and general malaise. Symptoms that lead people to conclude the treatment is making them sick, when in reality, the treatment is working, but the clearance route is congested. Set a reminder on your phone. Fill a large water bottle in the morning and make finishing it your minimum daily target. This is not a lifestyle suggestion. During an antiparasitic course, hydration is a clinical necessity. Now I want to ask you something directly, and it is medically relevant to everything we have covered in this video. The way your body responds to parasitic infection, the severity of symptoms, the degree of immune response, the speed of damage accumulation, changes substantially with age. In children, the primary risk factor is behavioral. The oral fecal transmission route is dramatically more active in early childhood because children explore the world through their hands and mouths, are in close physical contact with other children in group settings, and are less consistent with hand hygiene. But after the age of 40, the physiological defense mechanisms I described earlier, gastric acid production, bile concentration, intestinal immune response, begin a measurable age-related decline. The stomach produces less acid. The gallbladder secretes less concentrated bile. The intestinal immune response is slower and less robust. After 50, the published evidence shows that parasite-related complications, including iron-deficiency anemia and chronic systemic fatigue, present significantly more frequently than in younger adults. So here is my question, and it is genuinely useful to me as I plan future content. How old are you? Write your age in the comments below. The risk profile, the most relevant symptoms, and the most appropriate treatment parameters all vary by decade of life. And I want to know exactly who is watching this channel so I can make the content as directly useful to you as possible. Let me give you the clear, practical takeaway from everything I have just covered. The exact sequence I would tell a patient in my office. Step 1. Before you touch any antiparasitic treatment, spend 2 to 3 weeks establishing reliable daily bowel function and normalizing bile flow. No sluggish bowel, no treatment. An open functional elimination route is the non-negotiable prerequisite. Step 2. Run a sustained botanical protocol centered on concentrated aspen bark extract for 3 to 4 full weeks, supported by wormwood, everlasting, calamus root, and clove twice per week, covering every stage of the parasite life cycle from egg to sexually mature adult in the correct antiparasitic intestinal environment. Step 3. Drink aggressively throughout the entire course. Water drives toxin clearance through the kidneys, protects the liver from peak toxin concentrations during die-off, and prevents the headache and fatigue that make people abandon treatment prematurely. Do this in the correct sequence for the correct duration with adequate hydration, and you give your body a real, physiologically sound chance at clearing the chronic parasitic load that has been quietly degrading your energy, your skin, your digestion, and your neurological resilience for possibly years. Nobody in a white coat at a clinic appointment is going to walk you through this in the detail it deserves. The billing structure does not support it, and the pharmaceutical model does not incentivize it. The system makes more money managing your symptoms than resolving your root cause. I'm Sam Waterling, and that is exactly why this channel exists. Help Dr. Waterling reach 1,000 subscribers. Subscribe, hit like, and share this video with someone who deserves to know what you just learned. We are building something real here, one honest video at a time.